way of Will John.
People, what's happening? We are back again with this time Daniel Ishay. So I'm going to go ahead and give you guys a very brief bio on Daniel, and then we're going to kick it over to him to see what else he's about, and then we're going to get into all sorts of stuff. Of course, 𝗪𝗟𝗟 kicked a cat. If you didn't hear about that, we're going to get into that. Yeah, so listen, Daniel is a certified personal trainer and vegan activist. He defines himself as a vegan activist and personal trainer who uses logic, reason, and sarcasm to combat anti-vegan nonsense. So, Daniel, what's up? How you doing, man?
What up, Will? First, I just want to say thank you for having me on. Really appreciate it. And yeah, I mean, I guess that sentence is a very good representation of what I do. Probably why I put it there in the first place. But essentially, yeah, I'm an animal rights activist / personal trainer. I would say that I mostly care about the animal rights activism. Personal training is really cool as well, and I love nutrition science and fitness and exercise physiology. But I will, like, I'm not gonna lie. Once my animal rights activism takes off, I probably would put personal training to the side. It's more of like a monetary thing at the moment, like just to keep my social media presence more financially sustainable. But yeah, I do a lot of content related to animal rights and debunking a lot of the anti-vegan stuff we'll see online, whether it's ethical arguments where people try to make points as to why being vegan isn't a morally good thing to do, or at the very least, they'll say that it's morally neutral and that you don't really need to be vegan in order to consistently oppose animal abuse. Or I'll debunk content that's more based on nutrition science and plant-based eating. A lot of people will make claims about veganism and plant-based dieting in the form of, like vegans are missing nutrient X, Y, and Z. Therefore, I don't like being vegan maybe isn't a good idea. And sometimes they'll tie the health misinformation to the ethical arguments and say, like, well, yeah, being vegan is a good thing, but they're missing nutrients X, Y, and Z, so health should come first, etc. So I'll often either debunk arguments more in the philosophical sense, and in those scenarios, we'll get into like logic and moral philosophy, or I'll go into the more like nutrition science sense and get into the data. And then, of course, you mentioned in the sentence that I also use sarcasm as well. Yeah, I have like various skits on my channel in which I kind of make fun of different bad ideas against vegans. I find that the vegan community can be a little bit uptight and not too like down to earth, and for understandable reasons, of course. The vegan movement is in essence opposing a massive atrocity. It's a very serious movement that involves going against trillions of sentient beings being used and killed for human pleasure and all these things. So many vegans are very uptight and serious, which I totally understand, but also we need, in my opinion, some like comedic aspect as well, just for like mental health reasons and, to not be so not down to earth, right? But that's overall a general take on what I do.
Okay. Okay, so then, yeah, we've got plenty to dig into here. I want to, because a lot of the people that you're going to be speaking to are athletes. I mean, all these people, they're going to be varied backgrounds, some vegetarian, some probably vegan, to be honest, and some obviously have eaten meat their whole life, like I hadn't had too much exposure to any sort of vegan or plant-based lifestyle, even though eating healthy is obviously a part of being an athlete. So why don't we start there? You said you debunk a whole bunch of anti-vegan stuff. Let's start with what's the most common thing that people think about vegans and the vegan nutrition. Like one thing that I could probably say is, yeah, you kind of mentioned you're not getting enough nutrients, or you may not get enough calories, or all this. And I know that you, being a personal trainer, you work out, you lift, you do all this stuff. So what are we missing? What's the mainstream missing, and why? If it's, I'll put it straight to you. Like, if it's better, I'm assuming that your theory or your hypothesis is that it's better to eat a plant-based vegan diet. How come we haven't had so many switches, right? Wouldn't you just expect that the players just be like, whatever it takes?
Yeah.
right?
Well, I would say that, of course, the vegan diet isn't inherently better than a non-vegan diet. For example, somebody could have just Oreos and potato chips. That's not going to be as healthy as an omnivorous diet that is mainly whole plant-based foods plus like fish or something, right? Like that's going to be
Mhm.
much more nutrient dense. So I don't want to come on here and kind of make the categorical claim that vegan diets are inherently better, because that's definitely not true. There's some vegans who think this, which I think are problematic to the movement because it makes us look a little bit anti-scientific, right? Um,
Sure.
but I would say the reason that we haven't seen much switch is probably to do with the way in which we've been educated. I mean, growing up, I'm sure you know as well. Growing up in, where'd you say again? Kansas?
Kansas City,
Kansas City,
yeah.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, we're taught to kind of view that meats and animal products are primary sources of things like protein, and we're not really taught that we can also get plant sources of protein as well. So many people will kind of equate meats with health because protein is kind of an important thing, and especially when it comes to fitness, as you know, um, when a person starts to stimulate their muscles in some sense, our protein needs kind of go up because muscle breakdown occurs, and in order for protein synthesis to be most optimized, we need around like zero point 0.7 to zero point 0.9 grams of protein per pound of body weight. So many people will jump straight to animal foods because we've been taught that animal foods equals protein source, and then plant foods are more so like a maybe a micronutrient source where we can get things like like vitamin C, vitamin A, vitamin K. But in fact, you can get all the things you need on a plant based diet. Um, the fact is that every whole plant based food has all of the essential amino acids, maybe in varying proportions, but they're still absolutely there. I personally consume around 150 to 180 grams of protein per day. Um, it's just a matter of learning. And there's things, of course, like B12 that vegans have a higher chance of being deficient in because B12 in the past came from like the guts of ruminant animals and the bacteria within their bodies, as well as other animals. And livestock nowadays tend to be injected with B12. Uh, so when you decide to no longer consume animal products, you're having a higher chance of not having enough B12 because most plant foods, or basically all plant foods, don't naturally contain an optimal amount of B12. So it is true that vegans will have a higher chance to be B12 deficient only if we don't supplement. So it's highly recommended that vegans take like a B12 supplement. And I'd also say that there's actually I don't want to sit here and bore everybody with scientific data, but it's true to say that many people that aren't even vegan also suffer from a higher chance of B12 deficiency. So it's not really a vegan exclusive issue, although it is fair to say that vegans have a higher likelihood to be B12 deficient. So a lot of people will get on us about B12. Um, but yeah, to answer your question in like one sentence, so it's probably just education, and that's probably
Sure.
why it's not known like, oh, like we should be
Uh-huh.
vegan, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I
Mhm.
find, and I just had this discussion with someone. Obviously, you're aware of probably it's either Beyond Meat or Impossible Burger. I can't remember which one of them.
Mhm.
You know both of these
Yeah.
companies, though,
Mhm.
correct? Yeah. So, I can remember in say the like in the '90s where the prevalent idea was just that we will never make anything that is going to be replaceable to meat,
Mhm.
or to taste like it's replaceable to meat. And
Mhm.
I don't remember which one of the CEOs or founders of that company who stated that his goal was to get people off of meat. However, he realized, just much like you realize, comedy to a certain sense can also reach people.
Mhm.
And I think that's probably been one of the I'd probably call it an issue with the vegan movement, is that for some people who, there are a lot of people, like you said, that are uneducated about this entirely. And then when they meet a vegan, they're so uptight, maybe
Mhm.
judgmental, and all
Mhm.
this stuff. And this person is just coming from like I didn't
Yeah.
know any of this. I just go to the store, I get my food.
Yeah.
For the most part, most people don't know enough. I mean, most athletes care enough about their bodies to kind of find out what they're eating and why they're eating it. But even there's some people that are ignorant on
Mhm.
on plenty of subjects. So anyway, his idea was that we needed to make this product taste like meat. We've got to get it as close, because I don't really care. In the end, that's my goal, is to get them on this. It'll be healthier for them, and it's also something that he feels would be helpful for the environment. But my question then goes on to more one of a training thing. So I'm just gonna quickly recount. In like 2015 or 16, I played a portion, probably like 6 months of my season, on a vegetarian diet, and I had no issues whatsoever. I actually definitely felt cardio wise like I could actually probably run even more, and that's I'm not a thick guy, I'm a skinny guy, so running has not ever been an issue for me. But to feel like I have more cardio and stuff like that was cool and interesting. My one issue with it wasn't that I didn't feel like I was getting enough nutrients, that I didn't feel like I was strong. I did feel like I did have to do a lot of prep. I felt like I had to prep a lot to figure out what I wanted to eat, because beforehand, and also feeling hungry and stuff like that, when you eat meat, it stays in your stomach for a very long time, and you feel full for a very long time, and trying to switch off that, it's kind of like I didn't know what should be perfect and what should be not. So my question is kind of, if guys wanted to try this out, if they want to try out a vegan or a plant-based or a vegetarian, or if they want to, just dabble, how do you suggest guys go about doing this, and why specifically? Staying still in the realm of sports before we go into
So
anything else.
are you talking about people that already kind of track their foods anyway, that are not vegan?
You know what? I would kick it to people who are just working out, trying to do something, and looking for the best thing to eat.
Yeah.
In general,
Yeah, I would start with just doing research on. See, the thing with the internet nowadays is like there's a seemingly infinite amount of information out there. You can Google anything, and like pretty good results can come up. So there's plenty of pages if you look up like vegan diet for athletes, and you'll see a ton of things related to, for example, plant foods that are high in protein or something like that, right? And learn how to essentially just replace the animal foods that you would have otherwise eaten with those specific plant proteins, or high plant protein products. So, for example, because here's the thing: most people aren't eating a carnivore diet, right? Most people are eating an omnivorous diet, which means that most of their food already comes from vegan sources. But there's a select amount of things like chicken and maybe like dairy, milk, eggs, and fish that come from animals. So the idea is you're just going to want to replace those animal foods with nutrient appropriate plant-based foods. So, for example, if somebody has like rice, broccoli, and chicken breast, you just replace the chicken breast with something like tofu or tempeh. Tofu is just fermented soybeans, if people don't know. And then tempeh is a less processed version of tofu. There's also seitan, which is vital wheat gluten. It's pure gluten. So if you're gluten intolerant, of course, don't have that. There's also things like black beans, lentils, legumes, nuts, seeds, and of course, vegan protein powder as well, which I would say most people that are athletes already have protein powder anyway, but in the form of whey or casein. So you just have to find a vegan protein source. So in the case of athletes, I think it's actually a lot simpler than maybe for a non-athlete, because athletes tend to already have like meals that tend to be like mostly plants, because they're chasing carbohydrates in a sense, because they need a quick energy, because they're constantly moving, especially somebody who plays soccer. And yeah, so I would start there, and also understand that it's not just something that you'll get overnight. A lot of people get overwhelmed by lifestyle switches when it comes to diet, and they think like in the first day they have to have it down, right? But as opposed to that, you're going to understand that like with any lifestyle shift, it takes time, and you'll slowly learn. And I'm at a point right now where eating plant-based is like second nature. Like I don't even think about it. I go to the store, I go to Walmart, Whole Foods, whatever, and I know exactly where everything is. I know exactly what I need to get. But of course, it wasn't always that way. Yeah, in short, I mean, if you just look up plant-based diets for athletes, there's that, and there's also this thing called Challenge 22, which is where you can get like a free mentor to assist you in you transitioning to a vegan diet. Now, I just want to be very clear with you though, because right now we're talking about like things like health and plant-based eating, and in the vegan community, there's this kind of issue where plant-based eating and a vegan lifestyle kind of get conflated, because one can go to a plant-based diet for health reasons, but the word vegan at the very root has to do with like ethics. So sometimes people will say like "Oh, I'm vegan," and what they'll mean is they actually just consume a plant-based diet for health, and it's not necessarily their fault. Like, there's a lot of confusion over how these terms are being used, but if you're, for example, saying I'm vegan, and that just means that you uh, eat a plant-based diet, but you still buy things like leather or like support
I see.
circuses.
Okay.
um,
Uh-huh.
you're not a vegan. An ethical vegan would say like, okay, so you're plant-based, you're not like ethically vegan. You're not subscribing to the vegan moral philosophy, which is that, we should stop commodifying, exploiting, and killing animals for human benefit. So just want to make that clear too, because I'm using the term vegan and plant-based
Sure.
kind of interchangeably, but I think that distinction is important because of all the confusion online, um, about what both
Yeah.
mean.
Okay.
Hmm.
Then let's get more into that because that actually sounds really interesting. So the vegan ethical lifestyle would include, which is something I actually haven't really thought of.
Hmm.
You just mentioned not buying leather, not supporting circuses, and just the overall well-being of animals worldwide would then be it would take a step up within your framework
Hmm.
of the world. Then how does that work, and what do you hope? What do you actually hope for? Because as I think I've seen in one of your videos, you guys are up against so many people, so many different businesses. I mean, we can even get into the amount of money that you guys are technically up against. It seems an almost insurmountable thing, but I mean, as
Hmm.
we know, social change and things like this are 100% possible.
Yeah.
And if the right fire is lit, it will happen.
Hmm.
So what are you really hoping for?
Yeah. I mean, of course, ideally, we're gonna want the world to be ethically vegan. Now, if I'll be honest with you, I'm not convinced that that is going to ever happen. Um,
Mhm.
and when I say ethically
Why?
vegan, I mean a world in which people mentally have the moral philosophy of like veganism in their heads. I more so think that we will eventually shift to a plant-based world in which environmentally we're doing better, and like of course health wise. The reason I think is because, well, here's the thing. I could be wrong, and I hope I'm wrong. But there are just certain people out there that are so into meat that like it's likely they would never, at least those people would ever give it up. Maybe over the course of generational change, we can, kind of raise people to understand that animals should not be viewed as commodities. But there's certain people where I have conversations with them, and I would just say, okay, you know what? I hope that lab grown meat is coming out soon and to scale, because those are the things that are going to be needed for people that for sure are never going to give up meat. But there's an important
Mhm.
distinction there, right? Because although they switch to lab grown meat, they're not philosophically vegan, right? Like they to be a vegan, an ethical vegan, is to recognize the moral problem with breeding, commodifying, and killing and exploiting animals against their will for human benefit. So that's something that takes a long time to get people to not believe in anymore, and it's not really people's fault. They're raised in these systems. So um, yeah, I believe because of social conditioning and culture and how long it can take to break a habit that you've been habituating over 40 plus years. That's why I think that at least people that already are in this generation that have been alive for like multiple decades, it's going to be hard to switch them. Now, of course, there are people that are 50 and 60 that have changed their lifestyle and habits after 50 years of living an omnivorous lifestyle. But just as a result of my experience, it seems like it's the case that there's certain people that won't. I hope I'm wrong, but even if I'm right, I still think that like the next generation could still be conditioned in that direction. Does that make sense?
Sure.
Mhm.
Sure. Yeah, it does. It makes a whole lot of sense. And I mean, obviously, people are going to resist change regardless of what that is. I mean, we're talking about food here, but I mean,
Mhm.
there's no need to. I mean, it's obvious that we could draw this out to race,
Mhm.
or to sex or anything. They've all gone through this change, and it isn't immediate. I mean, you can watch how societies change, and
Mhm.
it doesn't happen necessarily overnight. There's
Mhm.
usually some sort of bubble up, and then
Mhm.
boom, it flows, and then that generation goes, and then boom, now
Mhm.
you're living in a new world.
Mhm.
So I do find that interesting, and you touched on these people who are never going to give it up, which reminded me that I wanted to ask you about the carnivore diet, which has become popular over the course of, I mean, there are proponents of that. Like, I actually don't know. I think you did do some videos on Jordan Peterson, maybe Michaela Peterson,
Yeah, Michaela Peterson.
who's a Michaela Peterson. Okay, so Michaela Peterson, for some of you guys that don't know, she's a huge proponent of the carnivore diet, which is essentially, right, just eating only meat.
Yeah, and like salt or
And
something like that. Yeah.
yeah, salt and meat and a lot of red meat. I think
Mm-hmm.
I'm no expert by any means, but and I think I'll withhold what my idea and what I've kind of seen and heard from Dr. Rhonda Patrick is another person who's spoken about it, who was on the fence about what it could do and all this stuff until we could see more testing and things like that. But what are your thoughts on why that's so prevalent? I have my own idea that I'll share, but what do you think?
Yeah. So, well, the carnivore diet is in a sense, it's an elimination diet, and many people anecdotally report feeling better after consuming a carnivore diet. Now, there's multiple reasons why this could be the case. If you're going from a bunch of processed food to just a straight up meat, you're bound to feel better in that you're not consuming, these super ultra processed foods and refined sugars going down, all these kinds of things. There's also inevitable or almost inevitable weight loss that occurs as well, because it's very hard to be in a calorie surplus on a carnivore diet. So
Okay.
often it is the case that people will lose weight and different symptoms will go down that are bad. Just weight loss in general comes with the lessening of symptoms, right? So there's that as well. Uh, Now, why is it appealing? I mean, meat is already this kind of like sensationalized thing, like ooh, like meat is especially for like males. I think like meat being
Man.
manly is a kind of like a thing that is talked about. So maybe it's the appeal of like, oh, the fact that it's all meat. There's people that tie it to our ancestors and how our even though it's not even true that our ancestors were carnivore, but um, and also because it's an elimination diet, there could be people with autoimmune symptoms or negative symptoms that are the result of a plant food that they've been consuming that they might have an allergy to or something like that. And through going carnivore, they've indirectly stopped eating that food, and now they feel like much better. And so it's not that the carnivore diet is like necessarily it was solving their problem. It's that the avoidance of a one or two plant foods that were causing their problem is what's solving their problem, like the avoidance of those two foods. So that there could be that as
Yeah.
well. Now the data on the carnivore diet is very weak. There really is not much. Um, there was a Harvard study that came out that was like basically a complete joke. The people it was self-reported, and the sample size of the study was also self-reported, meaning there was no randomization. It was literally like people from a carnivore tribe Facebook group just volunteering to be in it. No objective measurements were taken in the study. It was all just self-reported. It
Hmm.
was one of the least scientific studies you can imagine. It's like getting a bunch of crystal sellers to report to you how they feel after using crystals, like chakra stuff. And so it's not a good set of data. Now, the data on like saturated fat is what makes us think that the carnivore diet isn't good. Given that saturated fat can increase your LDL cholesterol, and then an increase of LDL cholesterol um, has a literally a causal relationship with the atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease or just heart disease. So that's why we worry about things like the carnivore diet being promoted, because your saturated fat as a consequence goes up so much, which can lead to higher LDL. And there's studies where they actually track meat consumption in large populations, and they control for all of these other confounding factors. If people here aren't familiar with what that means, it just means like variables that could actually alter the outcome. So they'll control for everything like vegetable intake going up, fruit intake going up, smoking intake going down. Well, they'll have all of these things happening. So people are taking it upon themselves to do all these little healthy things, like reducing smoking, increasing exercise. But they'll still see that when there's two groups that are doing all those things, but one group is increasing their meat consumption and the other is not, the group that's increasing their meat consumption still sees an increase in disease risk. And this is kind of like how you establish whether or not a particular intervention or a particular food or whatever might be causing something bad, right? you take two groups or multiple groups, and you adjust for confounding factors, and you see how the results differ. And so, yeah, there's plenty of data essentially to support the idea that red meat, especially, um, is not good for you. So that's another reason why
Mhm.
people are a bit worried that the carnivore diet is starting to like kind of become a trend. And then, of course, environmentally and ethically, there's a concern given how unsustainable animal agriculture is for the environment, its impact on greenhouse gas emissions, its water use, its land use. Because when you think about what animal products are, they are products derived from animals, meaning we also need to grow crops to feed those animals to then get the calories from them. Okay. And like you get about, I believe 10% of the calories that you put into an animal, you get it back in the form of meat. So let's say, it's just an easy way to think of it. Basically, for every 15 pounds of or for every 200 calories of grain you feed an animal, you'll get back maybe like 20 calories of meat. It's a
I see.
super
Right.
inefficient process. It's like taking the nutrients that you would want and giving them to another being and then filtering it out of the being to get like 10% of it back. It's really
Right.
silly. And then of course there's the
Yeah.
the ethical part as well, which is the where you're literally killing animals. So,
Uh-huh.
mhm.
So just before I touch on what you finished there with, I feel that the biggest portion and the biggest benefit from the carnivore diet is the elimination factor. I feel that it has to be.
Mhm.
That's just me, given what I know about my very limited view on friends, what they eat, what they do. I
Mhm.
think that it can confound with, and proper diet change does also confound with the generally the people who do it right, who do it and say that they're going to go, because people in dieting, it's very fickle, as we all know. People
Mhm.
try and start things and they stop, and they try and say they're going to do things and they don't. And but
Right.
the people who do it right, if they do commit to, when they finally commit, usually there are other supplemental factors that also go in. They start going to bed early.
Mhm.
They start,
Yeah.
they start drinking water instead of 7-Up and
Right.
Coke and stuff like that. And so you you have a lot of factors, and I think that the elimination portion of the carnivore diet. Now, I obviously too, I don't know whether or not it's truly beneficial, or if these people are getting any true benefit off of that, or if it's maybe they're getting some sort of short term benefit and there's a long term issue, something like that. There's
Mhm.
obviously, we don't know enough now. So that for me seems to be the thing. But
Mhm.
as you said, you touch and you have this big passion on this on animal rights. And my first question comes: where is this coming from? Because I don't see it as very prevalent. As a matter of fact, I can't think of a single friend of mine who is a proper proponent
Mm.
of animal rights. So where did this come for you? Was there a moment in your life, in your early on, to parents, or and also Ishay? What's your background? Are
Yeah,
you?
I'm a Middle
Could I
Eastern.
guess
Oh, sorry.
Middle Eastern? But
Yeah.
well, okay.
You can guess where.
I could kind of guess that, but yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, where? I couldn't even begin. I've spent a lot of time in the Middle East,
Mhm.
but I have no idea.
It's
So anyway, go ahead.
Israeli Iraqi kinda mix.
Israeli
Yeah.
Iraqi. Okay,
Little
real
Italian too,
cool.
with obviously outside of the Middle East, but, um,
Sure.
yeah, so this is probably my favorite thing to go into now, because you're asking now about the animal rights aspect.
Yeah.
So to be clear with everybody watching, I'm not, even, like, an animal lover. A lot of people think that just because 'cause you're a vegan, you must be an animal lover. You must, like, when a dog passes you on the street, you go crazy. You're vegan, you have to love animals. But, for me, it's more so it was the logical aspect of the vegan moral philosophy that got me. So essentially, after taking some time to ask yourself a couple moral questions, assuming you have basic empathy, you'll come to the realization that the reason that we care about human beings also exists within animals. Okay. So there's a little bit of a logic test that you can put somebody through. You can say to them, "Hey, do you think that it's okay to kill human beings for food?" And they'll say, "Of course not." Like, no. And then you ask them, "Is it okay to kill a cow for food?" And they'll say, "Yes," presumably, right? And what's implied in those two answers is that there's a moral difference, or a set of moral differences, between the two beings that justify the differential treatment of the other. So there's this argument. It's called the name the trade argument. It's basically you say, what is it that is true of cows that justifies killing them for food, which if we're present in a human would justify killing a human being for food, right? Just a logic test, consistency test, whatever. And so here's an example of like an answer someone will give. So they'll say it's okay to kill cows for food, but not humans. I'll say, okay, what is the morally relevant difference? They might say something like, well, cows aren't as intelligent as humans. They don't have a sense of tomorrow or whatever. So it's important that they say something like they don't have a sense of tomorrow because the trait low intelligence is a little bit vague. So I'll usually say something like, what do you mean by lower intelligence? Let's say they say, oh, they don't have a sense of tomorrow. I'll say, okay, so what's justifying killing a cow is the fact that they don't have a sense of tomorrow. And they say, yes. I say, okay, so let's take that trait and apply it to human beings. There's certain mentally disabled humans who don't have a sense of tomorrow. They actually show lower cognition than animals like pigs and cows. Is it okay to breed and kill these humans for food? And if the person wants to be logically consistent, they can bite the bullet on that and say, yeah, I think it's fine. But most people with basic empathy and who understand the importance of human rights will understand that they wouldn't think that it's okay to kill humans
Right.
with those traits. So now you have the person in a bit of a contradiction because I asked them what the trait was that justified killing them, which if we're present in a human would justify killing a human, and they name the trait. I apply the trait to a human, and they deny that it's ethical to kill the human. So yeah, that's kind of the where most of it comes from for me is that the justifications people give for killing animals for food, they when you apply them to human beings, they don't really accept the the logical extension of their view. And to be clear, this little consistency test, it is not aimed to equate the moral value of humans and animals. Uh, Being a vegan does not entail thinking that humans and animals are equal. If you listen really closely to what I'm doing in the test, it's saying what is it that makes animals not equal to humans, right? Essentially. And if they name the trait, and I say, okay, so presumably if that trait were applied to a human, it would also make the human less valuable. Not every human, but this one specific human.
Right.
So I simply cannot name a trait that would call for a logically consistent non-vegan position, right? And that's why I'm vegan, because I've determined over time, and many people who have basic empathy will determine this as well, that the reason that we value animals is is the fact that they're sentient and they can feel pain and they can suffer. And why do we know this? It's because well, we know this because we know that it's not intelligence that is why we value humans, because when a human lacks the intelligence, we still value them, right? Now, some people might say something like, "Okay, the difference isn't intelligence; it's species. That's the difference. Humans are humans. Cows aren't humans. Therefore, it's okay to kill a cow and not okay to kill a human." Now, just really think about what this means. I mean, this would mean that hypothetically, if we found out tomorrow that, let's say, I wasn't human or something, like there was a slight genetic variation in my DNA such that I
Right.
actually
Sure.
wasn't a human being. I still suffered though. I could still suffer. I could still feel pain. I could still communicate with you. Is it now okay to just kill me for food? I would hope not, right? Or if another species evolved alongside us that had our same cognition, but they weren't human, would it now be justified to kill them? Of course not. So even when the species trait is named, that's another problem. And also, it is a bit of an appeal to species in the same way that racism is based in an appeal to race or appeal to arbitrary group membership, where you say you're not a part of my group, therefore it's okay for me to kill you or exploit you, etc. Right? So yeah, that's kind of the main logic
Yeah.
underlying, I guess, the moral philosophy for
Okay.
me. But yeah, what do you think about that?
Yeah, intriguing because I've actually never done. I love these thought experiments and I love logic and stuff like that.
Mhm.
I love to to test and truly understand because given the world that we live in and the amount of information, you even touched on this, the amount of information and things that are out there, one of the things that we are losing as a society is our ability to deeply think and critically think about subjects.
Mm.
Um, and that is very, very clear. And it's been on the decline even before phones, as a matter of fact. And there's some
Mhm.
other strange reasons
Yeah.
for that. But I personally have never really gone into a deep thought into understanding how I feel about that. Growing up and now as an older guy, like I look back to things like I think I've been to one circus, maybe late 20s, mid 20s.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't really, it's never really been a scene or a thing for me. I mean, you find out about the abuse and what needs to happen in order to get the animals to go there, and you start to feel a little, it doesn't feel right in your stomach. It feels weird. Then zoos to kind of feel weird. As a kid, obviously, you have no true judgment and understanding of what you're seeing. You're just fascinated by this thing that's not you, then that's big or whatever it is, But what I actually wanted to do before I even delve more into my own thoughts is play devil's advocate to dig out more of what you think, because I'm sure there are people listening to this right now who have all sorts of thoughts and all sorts of things that they wish they could say. And I don't know that this is what they would want to ask. But the first one I would say is, you touched on the fact that we have empathy for animals, and we have empathy, obviously, for other humans. And one of the things that we do, just like we do in race, is say, you're not a part of my group, therefore X, Y, and Z is for sure okay. And we do this all the time. Have you seen some of the studies? And although it sounds like a joke kind of question, I'm serious. Have you seen some of the studies that have stated that plants have feelings, that plants can feel pain and all this stuff?
Yeah.
What do you do with that as far as an empathy thing? Like what next? If everything has a feeling,
Yeah.
What do we eat?
So to be clear with you, there actually aren't any studies that conclude that plants feel pain. What's happening there is they're conflating plant intelligence with plant sentience. Plants,
all right,
they react to stimuli, right? If you touch them, they might do these certain things, but reactions to stimuli don't imply sentience, and sentience is being defined as a sort of a subjective experience. The objective criteria at the moment, at least, for sentience is a central nervous system, a brain, nerves, etc. So just like a computer can respond to stimulus and has intelligence, but so can a plant. But just because there's this mechanical automatic reaction to stimulus doesn't mean that the plant itself is actually experiencing anything. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
just
it
like
does. It seems, yeah.
Just like you put in some kind of information into a computer that it processes, and then something happens, like it ends up doing this or that. That doesn't mean that the actual being itself has a kind of experience. Now, even if we were to assume that plants feel pain, it's still the case that the vegan diet would be the most ethical, because remember what I said earlier about the amount of plants that are required to feed these 70 billion land animals per year on top of the animals that are being killed. Essentially, less plants are needed to feed a world of vegan diet than an omnivorous one, because think of it this way: how many more plants would need to be grown and eaten? A world with, I think we're about getting close to 8 billion humans now, so I'll say 8 billion humans plus 70 billion land animals that need to eat plants, or just 8 billion humans. You understand?
Sure.
So
Yeah.
so there's just, even if we assume that plants feel pain, and we were going at it from like a utilitarian perspective, we wanted to reduce the amount of suffering in the world, a plant-based diet globally would still result in the least amount
would do that
of deaths.
I see.
Yeah,
that's a very good point.
Yeah, but I do want to make it clear though that there are no studies that conclude that plants feel pain, just that they react to stimuli, and that's
okay.
So
yeah, that's interesting. I mean, this is actually going to lead into my next question. I think okay. Well, let me finish up with the fact that still playing devil's advocate here. I think one of the big issues that I see from just the main public, which does still touch on the fact that I think deep critical thinking is being lost and is necessary for the betterment of society, and the fact that it's declining, I think, is probably one of the worst things that could happen to us as a species. But what if people just say they follow your logic? They say, I am empathetic towards other humans, and I actually, whatever you say, you're not necessarily an animal lover, but let's say this other person is an animal lover. They do enjoy animals, but they're okay with the fact that they want to eat the meat that they don't see it being killed. So they don't, there's a big disconnect, obviously, in society now, and what comes to their plate.
Yeah.
What if they run through your logical test and just say, I don't care?
Yeah, that's a tough one. See, here's the thing. Like, there's like kind of emotionally caring, and then there's like
Mhm,
logically understanding that veganism is an extension of your view. So if I can
mhm.
show to a person that, yeah, within their moral system, their own subjective moral system, I've established that the logical structure of their moral system is such that being a vegan is a moral obligation and that they should be one. And then they hit me with, yeah, I understand all that. And I definitely should be vegan, man. Like, I totally get it. But I
Mhm.
just don't really care. What that says to me is that logically they understand what they need to be doing, but emotionally that they don't. So at this point is when I would employ a bit more of like pathos, and I would tell them to go watch the documentaries in which you can see how terrible the conditions are of animals that are raised in these awful farms, and see if I can, get a sort of emotional reaction. And I'll start using modes of language that are completely outside of the scope of logic and these consistency tests. I'll instead start going into all the dark stuff about, you know, dairy cows being perpetually, forcibly, artificially inseminated or R-worded. I don't know if you get demonetized for saying that, so I'm saying R-worded. Um,
Okay.
I'll talk about
Well, I
how
don't know what R word necessarily. Wait, what are you referring to?
R-A-P-E-D.
Uh-huh, I got you.
Yeah,
Yeah, okay.
because
Alright.
because in order for a dairy cow to lactate, for example, they need to be
Ah,
pregnant,
that's right.
so
Yeah.
they need to be forcibly artificially inseminated, right?
Okay.
And they end up
Okay.
having a baby because they're literally pregnant, but the baby is going to be drinking the milk that we're trying to sell to humans, so they'll separate the mother from the baby, and mother cows are very maternal, so they will suffer and they will cry for days. um there's that. There's the fact that when a dairy cow is no longer is milked basically to death and can no longer produce milk at a cost effective rate for the farmer, they're hung upside down and have a knife slashed across their throat. um
Mhm.
pigs are thrown in gas chambers and suffocate from the inside out, um, with carbon
What?
monoxide.
What's going on there? What's going on there? I don't know about this.
Yeah,
Tell me about this.
pigs are gassed to death. It's very
Why?
common practice to kill them for food, for bacon, and all
But
these things.
yeah, but why is that just more efficient or what's the deal there?
It might be more efficient. I'm not sure what the exact reasoning is behind it, but yeah,
Okay.
it is a common practice. I mean,
All right.
chickens are hung upside down on a conveyor belt, and their necks are just kind of slid across a blade. It's terrible. These animals are in closed, confined spaces where when they're beings who would much rather be free, and they also go into slaughterhouses and they watch their friends suffer. There's chickens that are bred to the point because we humans like to manipulate things for profit, so we've actually bred them to grow to such unnatural sizes that their bones can't even handle them. So walking is difficult sometimes. Some of them are trampled to death because they can't make it out of the shed. Um, and uh, laying hens, male baby chicks, right, in the egg industry are actually ground up alive or suffocated in a bag because they're useless to the egg industry. So they
Mhm.
can't select for breeding strictly females at the moment. They're working on this, I believe, in Germany, but for now, that's still not the case. So male baby chicks are ground up alive, which isn't good as well. So this is the kind
For
of
what?
uh, well,
Sorry.
because they're useless to the egg industry. So there's no
Sure, but do they use that? Do they ground them up alive and then put them in something that we eat, or
I've heard some cases in which they use them for like chicken nuggets. Don't quote me on that.
okay,
I'm not gonna
okay,
yeah.
sure, sure,
But the point,
yeah,
regardless of how they're used, the fact is they're literally
yeah.
ground up alive.
I see.
That's the main point.
Got you. Yeah,
Um
yeah,
and yeah, there's plenty of other gruesome things I can say, but I don't want to,
yeah.
like
That's fine. You've
yeah.
painted a pretty good picture
Yeah.
already.
Yeah.
And that's the stuff that I wanted to hear and see, and
Mhm.
I'll come back to this step here as well. But you mentioned
Well,
obviously it's not just
before I go on, sorry, one more thing.
yeah. Go
So
ahead.
those are the things I would say in the emotional point. But you're asking, what if they say they don't care, right? After the explanation.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. What if they don't care?
Yeah. So let's if they say they don't care after all of that, like they've seen the documentaries, they're aware of all of the atrocities. At that point, I tell someone who's like an animal rights activist to move on to somebody who they can convince. Some people just they actually don't care, and like I can't, like, you're not in control of people's own minds ultimately, right? And if
Of course.
Now here's the thing though, like we're in a society where saying I just don't care and continuing to fund animal abuse is kind of socially acceptable. But I don't suppose that we'll always be in a society where someone can just say I don't care and there's no consequences. Like if somebody goes and abuses a child and they go, "Oh yeah, I just don't care," like they're gonna get fucked in some sense, right?
Of course.
Socially,
Yeah.
you know. So I'd imagine at some point we'll be in a world where you can't just say I don't care to the fact that you're paying for male baby chicks to be thrown in a macerator, or you're paying for uh, mother cows to be separated from their young, to be forcibly R-worded, as I said earlier,
Mhm.
and all these other atrocities. Like we probably won't be at a point where I don't care is just okay to say. As the culture shifts and morally we understand that we should not be funding literal torture to billions of beings. And by the way, I've said billions, but when you account for the sea animals, we're at trillions of animals dead per year
Wow.
for human sustenance. But anyway, you wanted to go into sustainability.
Yeah, well, the reason I was heading towards sustainability is
Hmm.
because I wanted to throw the question to you, given the nature of how we are doing this to animals in order to sustain the industries that we've built up around meat.
Hmm.
Would the vegan community, is there a system in which someone lives on their own farm, raises their own animals, treats them, gives them great lives, and then at the end of it decides, great, I'm going to use this meat. I'm not going to just let this, my cow broke its leg. I'm going to kill it because something, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You can imagine a world
Hmm.
where someone might logically come to the conclusion that I'm not going to participate in the world's, uh, you know, farm fest and just kind of go off on my own and do the thing. Would that be something that is passable? Is that a step in the right direction, or is that still just something that's just,
No,
you know,
so here's the thing. So what you're talking about right now is like humane farming or like local farming or a situation that is
sure.
better than the worst case scenario. So
Mm,
it comes back to the logic test again. I mean, I'd have to ask you.
mm.
I can run it on you right now, just for the sake of like
Yeah, yeah,
understanding it. So,
sure.
so let's say that you're a person who thinks that okay, yeah, factory farming is immoral, but what about like a local farm where an animal's raised on pasture and they have a good life, right? So
Hmm.
I'd ask you, like, is that ethical to kill them at the end? Presumably, let's just say you say yes, like,
Yeah, sure.
and then I say, okay,
All right.
so why can't I do that to a human being? Like, am I allowed to farm a human, give them a really nice life, and then kill them at 1/4 their lifespan because I want to eat them, you know? And
Ah, okay. So wait, that's my thing.
mm,
At 1/4 their lifespan, then obviously no, you would be cutting something short.
okay.
I don't know, since clearly, even though I'm from Kansas, we don't know shit about farms. No one lives in
Mhm.
Western Kansas.
Uh-huh.
What if you? I meant raising them throughout their entire life, because we do kind of do that, right, in society, right? If you get to the end of your your
Mhm.
life and someone needs a kidney or whatever it is that you,
Yeah.
maybe we do take it, and we do that. Is there not a way that that's possible? Are animals just worthless to us by the time they've lived their 5, 10,
So
whatever
so you're asking
lifespan? Or
yeah, so you're asking, would it be ethical to kill an animal? Or are you saying would it be ethical to kill
would it be
to
ethical?
eat an animal that died of old age or something like that?
Okay, that's a different. That's close. That's a different one. Yeah.
Mhm.
Would it be ethical to kill an animal that was going to die or was in dire trouble,
Like
to kill them and then use
euthanasia.
that meat? I guess yeah, it would be almost like euthanasia. Yeah.
Yeah, so if you have an animal that so vegans will give you very different answers on this. Some vegans have this like
Okay.
very strict view that like doesn't matter the scenario, you can never eat an animal. It's disrespectful, blah 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 to the
I
animal.
see.
In my view, we're kind of anthropomorphizing animals a bit too much there. I don't know that an animal really has a concern for what you do with their body after they're
Mhm,
dead. So for me, for example, I think eating roadkill, as disgusting as that
mhm.
sounds, I don't have a moral problem with it. My issue is with
Sure.
the suffering and death that occurs, and also the well-being that is prevented when you kill an animal prematurely or you raise them and you kill them, etc. So,
Right.
if you had an
Right.
animal that you raised, like if someone has a dog and they
Mhm.
raise them as a pet, it's great. Like there's like they're alive for like 12 years or so, and then they die of old age. Do I really have a moral problem with them eating the dog? I mean, there might be one based in extrinsic value, like let's say like your daughter really loved this dog and it would really hurt your
Right.
daughter to watch you eat her dog, then like yes, that's a
Yeah.
problem. But if in a vacuum where like you're on a stranded island and there's no one that really cares
Hmm.
for the animal and there's no extrinsic value attached to them, you can. I don't really think there's a moral problem, but many vegans would say there is. Many vegans would say there isn't. Um,
Okay.
See, because you'll see that after this conversation, what I really care about is like reducing suffering and increasing well-being. So when you kill an animal prematurely, you are preventing their entire life of potential well-being. That's a problem to me. And then there's also the shitty conditions that animals are brought in that involve suffering. And then also I have a problem with killing. So if the animal isn't killed, if they just happen to, die of old age as all animals do, I think that's okay. Now I would ask you, like, what about eating humans that die of old age, right? Now, I think one can make a reasonable case as to why there is a difference between saying we can eat humans when they die of old age versus others, because it would generate suffering in a human while they're alive to know that they're going to be eaten after they die.
Okay.
So we wouldn't want to like create that kind of standard, but that
Uh-huh.
doesn't really apply to animals, at least.
As
Yeah,
far as
but as
as
far
far
as
as
we
we
can
can
tell.
understand. Yeah.
But also that
Yeah.
to be consistent though, we can bring it on to like disabled humans now and say, is it okay to eat a disabled? It gets really weird, these kind of philosophy
Right.
problems. But like, is it
Yeah.
okay to kill a disabled, not kill, but eat a disabled human that just happened to die of old age or something like that, right?
Hmm.
To me,
Hmm.
it's all repulsive and weird and gross. But do I technically have a moral problem with it? Not really. Unless
Yeah.
again, there's
Okay.
extrinsic value and there's a family and they would all be
Of
uncomfortable
course.
if you did it.
Of course. Yeah, that seems like a logical,
Hmm.
next step to understand. Yeah, if you're creating suffering once again,
Yeah.
outside of that, then it creates a moral issue.
Right.
Um, okay, then I want to go back just a little bit because we touched on the plants and not having feelings and
Hmm.
what was going on there, but there are for sure, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with the panpsychic or panpsychism as a belief system. Do you know what panpsychism
I've
is?
heard of it like 5 times, but just give me, I guess, a
Okay.
little
Okay.
explanation.
The well, the very quick rundown. If and once again, no expert here. I'm an idiot, but they essentially would state that all things have consciousness. That would extend out into even non-living, non-carbon based. Or sorry, not carbon based, but
Like
not animals.
inanimate
Sorry. So
objects,
inanimate objects.
yeah,
Thank you.
a
Yes.
rock.
Like I said,
Hmm.
I'm an idiot. Yes, exactly. So rocks, beds, plastic, a sock, a book, etc. And I'm not sure if how those people would feel and how they do feel on a true panpsychic believer, how they would feel about eating this and that and how they come through that, if they feel that the animals that they are eating or the plants that they're eating feel as if there's a proper trade-off. That's the way the world is. A lot of people definitely are going to fall back on that's the way, whatever, that there's that human pyramid,
Hmm.
the structure, and it's just like animals at the top and the
Hmm.
yada yada yada. And so that's just life. But I'm curious how much, because I know that these worlds do cross spiritualism and veganism
Hmm.
and all that stuff. There is definitely some crisscross within that world. They definitely touch. How much does that has played a role for you? Is there any sort of spiritual notions or touches that come along with that? Have you attached yourself to any sort of maybe religious practices or
Hmm.
anything like that?
Yeah, well, so I'm more of an agnostic when it comes to things like religion,
Hmm.
and spirituality. I've had things that I would call maybe spiritual experiences. Was I sober? Probably not,
Hmm.
but
It's through the use of like psychedelics and stuff like
psychedelics.
that.
Right, right.
Got you. Yeah. Okay.
But
Cool.
I'm a very like sciencey empiricism kind of guy. I like facts, logic, and whatever. But I'm also agnostic on things like God and things that are essentially unfalsifiable. There could be an alien in my room right now that I just can't see.
Hmm.
I think of those kinds of concepts as the way that we would talk about astrophysics in comparison to an ant's cognition. Like the topic of
Hmm.
astrophysics is something so beyond the consciousness of an ant, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't exist, like to the ant. So, I think of things like that as things that are basically unverifiable to the human mind, but they very well could exist. I don't really know. Now, whether or not I've found spiritual practices that align with the veganism. I personally don't have any, but there are like verses in the Bible that have been interpreted as like basically God's way of saying go vegan. There's there's a
Okay.
there's a Buddhist practices and Hindu practices as well that connect to these kinds of things. There's Jainism, uh, the art of like I believe it's just like trying to live in a way that causes the least amount of suffering. So there's religious and spiritual vegans. There's more like environmental vegans that love science and that are a bit more agnostic, but they still recognize the problem with suffering. So yeah, the vegan movement is very diverse, I guess, and there's many different mental processes, or like you can say philosophies, that lead to the same conclusion that we should not be killing animals for pleasure and things like this.
So then, with all that said, I'd have to ask, what if you could have any logical next step for our society? If we could wake up tomorrow and the next thing would happen, because, like you said, if we include the sea animals, we're talking about trillions of animals, and you said a year that are killed
Yeah,
just to fund us a year.
yeah, per year annually,
That's insane.
globally. Yeah.
That's insane, really. Yeah. So globally, yeah, that makes me think that we couldn't just stop tomorrow. Like, which is, makes me want to know what the next logical step is. And I know we said change takes a whole lot of time, but if you could have the
Hmm.
next step on the journey for our species
Hmm.
and moving towards a plant-based diet, what would it be?
Yeah. So to be clear, yeah, of course, a vegan world won't really happen overnight. If it did, there would be problems. We'd have a lot of animals that were supposed to be killed. That uh, it's like, what do we do with them now, right? But
Right.
luckily, if the vegan world would have come, it would come over time, meaning the supply for animals would slowly go down because the demand would go down. Meaning, by the time we have a vegan world, there would be less overall animals that we need to figure out what to do with. And a vegan world would also contain more sanctuaries as a result. So we'd probably have more carrying capacity for these leftover animals. Now, you said plant based, or get the world to plant based. Just to be clear with you, I don't
Sure.
really care to bring the world to a plant based world. I care to bring the world to like a vegan world. So this includes
Okay.
things that aren't plants, like lab grown meat, anything that eliminates the
Huh.
use of animals. So if I could replace all animal products with, or let's say all meat, because I believe lab grown dairy is still kind of in the works. But all meat with lab grown meat, and it was the same price. Um, I would do that. I would do that immediately, as quick as I can,
Hmm.
because
Okay.
molecularly it's the same thing. It's way less resource intensive. No animals have to suffer and die for the product, and there might be reason to believe that uh, we can modify the nutritional aspect of it, maybe making it a little healthier. But that's probably what my first thing would be, because I think what stops most people from being vegan is their emotional attachments to food and how they've habituated consuming these foods and how it's part of their cultures, and giving these foods up just seems like such a large step. So if I can literally just replace all these foods with the same exact thing, except the means by which we obtain the food is different, in other words, lab grown meat, I would do that globally if I had like the power.
Okay. Yeah.
Hmm.
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, it's obviously a hypothetical question, but
Yeah.
it does, kind of push the focus on where, you personally would align with what would be the best next step.
Yeah.
And so, before we finish up and talking about what these guys can check out on your YouTube channel and your social media and all the rest of this stuff, if someone now, having listened to this, wants to go check out more, they want to go do a little bit more research. All right, I heard this guy on here, he's talking some stuff. Okay, maybe that now they want to see if you're full of shit, right?
Right.
Which is within everyone's right to try and continue
Yeah.
their education and research. What would you have them see? And on top of that question, so what would you have them research? What would you have them see? What documentary or whatever? And then
Hmm.
on top of that, their first step. Let's say you've already pitched them on the idea. They want to try something, and that's food wise. And what should they just go do next?
Okay. So to start with the documentaries for the ethical aspect of veganism, I would say go watch Earthlings and Dominion, and watching Earthlings and Dominion, I would ask you to like watch it in the sense that you're like an alien visiting Earth, and you're just seeing what humans have managed to do with the lesser beings, and
Mhm.
ask yourself if you really want to directly support that with your money and participate in that. Environmentally, Cowspiracy is a good documentary, which goes into the environmental damages that come from animal agriculture. And health wise, I would, especially for your athlete audience, the Game Changers. I don't know if you've seen that
No, I haven't actually.
on Netflix. Yeah, really good documentary. If it's made by James Wilkes, who's I think an ex UFC fighter, and it's very scientifically based.
What's his name? Sorry,
Uh,
I'll look it up.
yeah, James Wilkes.
James Wilkes. Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
Wilks.
Cool.
Super cool dude. Very scientifically based documentary. There might be a couple points that were a little weird, but for the most part, it will get you to understanding like how to be an athlete or give you an idea of what it's like to be an athlete as a plant-based person. Now, in regards to where to start, I would, like I said before, it's going to depend on your goals. So if you're an athlete, if you just Google veganism for athletes, there are tons. There's almost too many resources. But start there. Start replacing your protein dense foods with foods like tofu, tempeh, seitan, TVP, which is textured vegetable protein, uh, nuts, seeds, quinoa, legume pastas, and protein powder, which people already tend to use anyway. So it's not like a vegan exclusive thing. I'd also recommend getting a multivitamin that contains B12, D3, and iodine, which there are many of. If you just go on Amazon and look up vegan multivitamin, they'll come up. And I would make sure you're eating enough calories. Try to count how many calories you've been eating per day on your omnivorous diet that have been making you feel good, and just try to match that on the vegan diet so that you're not absorbing less energy. One of the big problems with people who go vegan is they don't realize, but a lot of plant foods on average are higher in volume, but lower in calories, making them actually undereat without realizing it. So, with that in mind, you want to actually count your calories and make sure they're the same, if not even a little more than what you were eating when you were not vegan. Understand it's a process. It takes time, and of course, ethically, although it maybe is more sustainable to take the slower approach, the animals would prefer that you kind of speed it up, right? Because they don't want to continuously be bred and murdered and all these things. So, yeah. So I would say to start there. Not to like plug my own stuff, but like I have plenty of videos too where I debunk anti-vegan nutrition stuff, so you can learn a bit about how we get the nutrients we get. Essentially, my channel is like it informs people by debunking others, as opposed to me making a
Sure.
video saying, "Hey, let's talk about this today." It's more like this person said X, Y, and Z. Here's why they're wrong. Here's the science. Here's the data. You know. So that, but I would start with all of those kinds of
There.
resources and.
That's
Mhm.
That's awesome. Yeah, and you actually you just touched on what I was gonna talk about, which was what these guys can find on your channel and stuff like that, which is a really cool approach actually. And for everybody that's listening, as always, we're always pushing guys to research more, do more, and that's just, today obviously we had a heavy focus on nutrition, but tomorrow it might be about where you get your news, you
Right.
know, or or who are you listening to? How do you know that this person is telling you the truth and trying to push for information that may have been hidden to you on purpose or not? Maybe it's just
Right.
neglected because we as humans just don't care about this, and so we're not even paying any attention. So,
Mhm.
guys, definitely go check some stuff out. Whether or not you decide to make this jump, obviously that is on you, and it's it's still a world you live in where you have that choice. But please, definitely, for your own sakes, have a look, check it out. It may vibe with you, and if it does, you can make that jump, and then you can be another person who's spreading that message, trying to help people. And obviously, I personally see nothing wrong with the fact that you want to create less suffering in the world, which is a very, very honorable actual ethos
Mhm.
to have. So kudos for that, because you're obviously up against a lot.
Yeah.
So I admire
Uh-huh.
you for that. It takes a lot of courage to do that. And yeah, man, this was great. I definitely think we're gonna have you come back on. I think it would be really cool, especially considering you're very eloquent and you're very science based and logical. I think it'd be really cool to get someone from the other side
Mhm.
completely, not to get an argument and get you guys in a ring, but to have someone like
Discussion.
me
Mhm.
Yeah, definitely a definite discussion, with just like, one idiot in between that just asks questions.
Yeah.
And
I don't think you're an
that's
idiot,
just-
but yeah.
yeah. No, I mean, yeah, that's a tagline for our podcast, which is just,
Yeah.
Will talks to people about things he knows nothing about, which is generally the way I like to do the podcast, because I have my ethos for the podcast, at least, is that I don't really care if you like it or not. I'm here to learn. And if you happen to take some good knowledge and some good stuff from what it is, then that's another great thing for it. But truly, I'm here to learn myself. And so anyway, guys, I hope you guys got a lot out of this. Check out all this stuff. If you're watching this on YouTube, we have linked to everything and to Daniel's channel in the description box. If you are listening to this, then everything is in the show notes. Daniel, awesome stuff, man. Appreciate it.
Yeah, man. No worries. Thank you for having me.
All right. See you guys later.